Mabuhay! Good day, everyone. Welcome to Popcorn at the Barracks. Thank you for joining us here either via Zoom or Facebook Live. This talk is part of Filipinas Heritage Library's Liberation, War, and Hope program, a series of events held in commemoration of the 75th anniversary of the end of World War II, presented by the Ayala Foundation, Filipinas Heritage Library, and the U.S. Embassy in the Philippines. For this webinar, Manila Bulletin is our official media partner to share timely stories and timeless truths. Let us begin our program by singing the Philippine National Anthem, to be followed by the U.S. National Anthem and a message from our media partner.
Tumayo po tayong lahat, ilagay ang kanang kamay sa ating dibdib at sabay-sabay nating awitin ang pambansang awit ng Pilipinas.
Bayang magiliw, perlas ng silanganan, alab ng puso, sa dibdib mo'y buhay. Lupang hinirang, tuyang ka ng magiting, sa manlulupi, di ka pasisiil, sa dagat at bundok, sa simoy at sa langit mong bughaw, may dilagang tula at awit sa paglayang minamahal, ang kisap ng watawat mo'y tagumpay na nagniningning, ang bituin at araw niya kailan pa may di magdidilim. Lupa ng araw ng luwalhati pagsinta, buhay ay langit sa piling mo. Aming ligaya na pag may mga api, ang mamatay ng dahil sa'yo.
This is the Manila Bulletin, traversing time and truth since 1900, the newspaper with a century-long legacy of standing witness to the country's history and development. Today, the Manila Bulletin strives to make the nation be fully informed, and the Manila Bulletin will continue to inform, inspire, empower, telling timely stories and timeless truths through this century and beyond.
Good morning once again to our viewers in the Philippines, and also hello to everyone watching from around the world. I am Raven Esperanza and I am your host for today's event. Are you ready for today's talk? Now, to get some engagement from our audience, may I ask everyone to type in number 1 in the chat box for our Zoom participants, or, of course, the comment section of our live stream for our Facebook users. Let us see how our audience are really looking forward for this webinar for today. All right. Perhaps everyone is really looking forward to this talk. Okay. Popcorn at the Barracks. Thank you so much, by the way. Thank you, everyone. Now let us proceed. Popcorn at the Barracks is presented by Filipinas Heritage Library, or FHL, a Filipiniana library managed by Ayala Foundation. The library has a whole new look with refreshed and warm interiors to make sure you feel comfortable for your study and research needs when it comes to Philippine history and culture. FHL's mission is to spark and stoke interest in the visual, oral, and printed story of the Filipino through its collections of documentary heritage materials in the form of books, periodicals, documents, photographs, music, videos, and digital resources. FHL has been organizing programs related to World War II, such as exhibitions, lectures, and film screenings in connection with the library's Roderick Hall collection of books and materials on World War II in the Philippines. These materials were entrusted to FHL by Mr. Roderick Hall, a World War II survivor and generous supporter of the library's World War II collection and programs, to raise awareness about the struggles and contributions of our people during the war. We remember Mr. Hall today, who sadly passed away in January this year. The community lost a staunch advocate of war memory, an ardent supporter, and a beloved patron. We are committed to honoring his legacy and continuing his mission of commemorating the struggles and hard-won insights of the Second World War. Let us pause and observe a few moments of silence in remembrance of him. Let us now proceed with some few reminders. In case there are lags in the video or live stream, please stay on the session and just wait for it to load again. All attendees on Zoom are on mute to assure the quality of our audio during this webinar. If you have questions, you may use the Q&A box instead of the chat box for our Zoom attendees, or the comment section of the Facebook live stream, and we'll try our best to accommodate them during the Q&A session later. After the talk, please fill out the feedback form to get your digital certificate. Now, did you get all of those? May I ask this time our audience if you could type in number 2 on our chat box or the comment section? Wow, very fast response. Indeed, we have an active audience for today. And with that, let us proceed with our agenda for today. In this latest installment of Liberation Talks, independent filmmaker and UP professor Nick Deocampo introduces how to view and analyze movies with cinematic science. He also reconstructs movies, spectatorship, and film production during and after the war. This history will shed light on how nationalist filmmakers use Hollywood melodrama to revisit wartime and post-war Filipino-American relations. Reflecting on Cold War developments, Del Campo will examine movies that deal with the theme of the Second World War. Now, let me introduce our esteemed speaker. Nick Deocampo is a filmmaker, film historian, and an author. He is also an advocate for alternative cinema and was the former chair of the UNESCO Philippines Memory of the World Committee. His present research project is the pedagogical application of semiotics in Philippine cinema. He presently teaches at UP Film Institute in the University of the Philippines, Diliman. He earned the Master of Arts degree in Cinema Studies from New York University as a Fulbright Hays Fellow and received his certificate in film as a French government scholar in Paris. His films have screened here and abroad, the latest being the retrospective that the Cinématique Française gave him to celebrate his 40th anniversary as a documentary filmmaker. His prize-winning works include Oliver, Revolutions Happen Like Refrains in a Song, and The Sex Warriors and the Samurai. As a film historian, he has authored books that won 4 national book awards like Cine, Spanish Influences on Philippine Cinema, and EGA, Cinema in the Philippines During World War II, and 2 other publications. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Nick Deocampo. Hello, Sir Nick. How are you?
Hi, good morning. I'm fine. I'm very excited.
Great. Can you give us a little bit of a teaser about your talk for today?
Well, the subject of my talk is really on the post-war legacies of on Philippine cinema. So I'm working on and presenting my ideas about how to read these films via semiotics. And the texts that I'm using are the films by Lino Brocka and Manuel. So I'm pretty excited to engage our audience to some discussion on these issues.
Great. We are too are very excited for this talk. Now, let's get on with the show.
Popcorn at the Barracks, National Cinema after World War II. Good day, everybody. Today, I will discuss the legacies of World War II on Philippine cinema using 3 different perspectives: historiographic, semiotic, and nationalist. For those who are familiar with my former talks, they know how I approached my discussions before using history as my framework. For the first part of my presentation, I will be using a historical approach in discussing wartime and post-war issues related to cinema. This will cover topics related to the treatment of American films during the 3-year occupation of the Philippines by the Japanese military, as well as the triumphant return of Hollywood on local screens when World War II was over. The second part of my presentation will be semiotic in approach. Semiotics is the science of signs. My aim in using it is to provide us a tool to give meanings using the signs that we see in the films that we watch, the images, sounds, and gestures. To do this, I will make a specific reading of 2 particular films that will be helpful for our webinar today. My main text is a film directed by Lino Brocka, Hellow, Soldier. It provides an allegory of the post-war relations that the Philippines maintained with its former colonizer in a post-colonial scenario. My secondary text is a film by Manuel, Victory Joe, shot in 1946 during the liberation, soon after war ended. In both films, we find the deployment of semiotic signs that reveal racial as well as cinematic meanings through the reworking of romance drama. The use of semiotics will help us see how visual language serves as a means to understand the messages that have coded the images that we watch on the screen. Not relying on the dialogues alone, the film provides meanings that are produced by cinematic signs. Finally, we try to see how nationalism forms a framework that made cinema evolve from its colonial past to become a national culture. This found realization after our country was given its independence in 1946. The cinema that already flourished pre-war could not but become Filipino in the light of the political identity that was embraced by the founding nation. Through a nationalist framework, we will see how the colonial legacy of America became adapted to form a cinema that contained the nationalist aspirations of our people. The occupation of the Philippines after the U.S. naval victory in the Battle of Manila Bay in 1898 ushered in the colonial chapter of the Philippines under the Americans. For the next half century, the US brought new influences to the country, among them the motion pictures. With the parallel rise of the United States as the world's superpower and Hollywood's emergence as the world's leader in the film market, the Philippines was at the receiving end of both their influences. Politically, the Philippines became a colony, and culturally, it became a major film market for America's film products in the Pacific. The country's American colonization led to dependency. Specifically, the film medium, which is not indigenous to the country, relied on foreign importation while becoming the country's dominant public entertainment. Eventually becoming the national culture, the country imports every piece of equipment needed to operate the movie industry. Its phenomenal growth coincided with America's prominence as the world's new superpower. But America's dominance became challenged with the outbreak of World War II. The war that tore the country apart also brought havoc to cinema. A film war was waged by the Japanese using film as propaganda. Determined to become Asia's own superpower, allied with the Axis powers of Germany and Italy, Japan took under its control the country's nascent local movie industry. Preceding the Japanese occupation, the infant Tagalog movie industry imitated everything that was Hollywood. It adopted the studio system as its creative infrastructure. With the arrival of the Japanese military and the retreat of US forces, everything came under Japanese control. The same Hollywood traits that molded local cinema became the target of the Japanese film war. Eiga Hakusha, the Japanese propaganda office, aimed at erasing all American film influences in the country. It waged an all-out war to eradicate every vestige of American influence, including those in film. As in the battlefield, so it was on the screen. The all-out war started with the sequestration of every film studio and office, taking possession of all their movies. All movie theaters had to secure permits before they could operate. Every movie worker, including actors and directors, had to be registered. Every frame of the film shown was censored in order to expunge images of the US flag or anything signifying American presence. It included as well scenes showing the Japanese being demeaned, laughed at, or mocked, which were all deleted. The harsh censorship of movie entertainment resulted to mangled stories, where audiences could no longer make sense of what they saw on the screen. It was a surprise why Hollywood movies could still be shown despite an official ban on them. This was because there was a short supply of movies. Enemy films found a chance to be screened. The Japanese relented in showing Hollywood movies, but in forms that no longer made sense. All things changed when the Philippines finally became liberated by the Americans in 1945. The return of US troops opened the floodgates for Hollywood movies that were earlier embargoed. When Hollywood once more flooded local screens, long lines of movie viewers could be seen. Everyone was eager to watch the entertainment they missed for 3 long years. Hollywood's hold on the imagination of Filipinos was spellbinding. It was a loyal audience that greeted every John Wayne movie and every Katharine Hepburn film that was screened. Keeping up with its model, the Tagalog movie industry picked up where it left off when the war disrupted its pre-war growth. The sudden rise of the local film industry was phenomenal. In less than 10 years since war ended in 1945, the Tagalog movie industry experienced its golden age. This came about due to the domination of the Big Four, consisting of 4 movie studios: LVN, Sampaguita, Premier, and Lebran. They produced the lion's share of movies per year, complemented by films produced by the independent film sector or non-studio film productions. As Hollywood reclaimed its Philippine market, siphoning millions of pesos from the war-torn country and remitting them to US banks, the Tagalog movie industry served as its local rival by competing at the box office. Imitating everything from Hollywood, from film genres to film language, importing the technology and exporting nothing in return, the Tagalog movie industry was a clone to its Hollywood model. American influence was the cornerstone of the country's post-war cinema, so that even if that cinema became national, it still could not do away with the American influences that came to roost on our homemade movie industry. This national cinema saw its cycle of boom and bust, when the golden age that was achieved in the 50s led to a sudden decline when the 60s came. Major studios responsible for producing the main bulk of film output collapsed due to labor problems. With the independent film producers saving the movie industry after the studio decline, excessive commercialism took over. Much of the movies were swaddled in inane entertainment. Escapism became the hallmark of movies until martial law was declared. With the coming of the 70s, a new wave of filmmakers emerged who gave a new direction to Philippine cinema. This happened during the period of military rule under President Ferdinand Marcos. The generation of Lino Brocka, Ismael Bernal, Mike De Leon, Marilu Diaz-Abaya, and the rest brought Philippine cinema to new heights. While a national identity began to emerge in local movies, how much of it was shaped by American influences? The popcorn mentioned in this talk's title alludes to an American habit of munching this snack which we Filipinos have inherited, revealing many of the unreflected pleasures that grew out of our colonial past with the United States. For good or bad, there is always an American lurking inside each one of us. For the purpose of understanding cinema in a more meaningful way, I now move from the historiographic context of Philippine cinema to find meaning in the film text. In doing so, I introduce ourselves to semiotics. As earlier mentioned, semiotics is a field of knowledge related to the study of signs. Signs, in our common knowledge, are representations whether through words, sounds, gestures, or other bodies or forms that are coded with meanings. They contain knowledge in the way they embody meanings that are signified through the signs. They represent ideas. One way to think about these signs may be through what Charles Sanders Peirce has devised as a trichotomy of signs. These are the icon, index, and symbol. An icon is when there is a physical resemblance between a sign and the object it represents. Examples are the images of a male and a female that you see to indicate the comfort room. An icon may also refer to the sacred image, such as that of Jesus Christ. An index is when the sign indicates a meaning through the representation it makes. There may be a direct motivation between the object and its representation. A signifier has a direct correlation in space and time with the signified. For example, the photograph of a man and a woman, or the hand of a clock that indicates time. Our inability to see time allows us to have an idea of what time it is simply by looking at the hand of the clock, as it indicates what otherwise is an abstract, unseen time. A symbol is a sign that creates an arbitrary meaning, hence needing a contractual relation between the sign and the perceiving agent. We see examples of this in the male-female symbols connoting genders, or of the color red, which, when seen on a Philippine flag displayed with its red banner on top, indicates war. This is an arbitrary designation of meaning that Filipinos are taught with regards to the proper use of their national emblem. Such an arbitrary meaning is even protected by law, so that one cannot display the flag with a red scene on top because of the meaning it invokes. But for an Indonesian whose flag has the red banner on top for its design, the meaning we designate to the color red is no concern of theirs. The Indonesians will not know that when our flag is reversed with the red color up, it signifies that our country is at war. This is not the case for the Indonesian flag, whose red color is always on top. The meaning is set by the culture that provides its signification. Symbols are products of conventions that we adhere to if we want to have order to reign. Cinema as a medium is a semiotic haven. For semioticians, cinema offers the experience of having signs to produce meanings, as well as the affects that make movie-going an abundant perceptual and cognitive experience. To watch movies and understand them is to experience the workings of signs. Sadly, many of us take this experience for granted in favor of the film's story or its contextual relevance. In many of our movie watching experience, we hardly become conscious of the power that signs have on our understanding of the movies that we watch. In the film Hello, Soldier by Lino Brocka, produced in 1974, the film provides us with an opportunity to analyze its contents and structure and find out how far have American film influences have shaped this work by a filmmaker declared to be the Philippines' national artist. Using semiotics to discuss the cinematic influences cast by Hollywood, let us study how Brocka uses signs to provide meanings in his film. In the film, we see a slum colony. It is an image that became the director's filmic trademark. It was the same image disdained by the First Lady Imelda Marcos. His opposing views over the same image puts the two at loggerheads with each other, not only artistically but politically. How a similar image elicited dissimilar reactions shows the power of the image in coding meanings. For Brocka, the image showed truth. For Imelda, a chance to suppress it. The slum became the indexical representation of Manila that Imelda did not want people to see. For Brocka, it was the image he wanted everyone to see. In the context of post-war Philippines, the slums became a contemporary phenomenon when city centers such as Manila were swamped by people fleeing the poverty of the rural areas, but only to be trapped in a life of squalor in the city. The slum became a modern-day image of poverty. It became a visual indicator of the state of the country's economy. For people who govern, like Imelda, who was once designated as governor of Metropolitan Manila, the image of the slum was a sign that needed erasure. Thus, Imelda went as far as erecting fences to hide them, especially to foreigners that she needed to impress. The slum for Brocka became an indexical replica of the Philippines' true state of economic life. Being a realist, the film director found an image that he could use as a sign to politicize and weaponize. This came as a part of the greater social struggle gripping the nation as Filipinos suffered from poverty and corruption. Brocka found his battle cry in the use of the slum as a powerful cinematic index in his fight against the Marcos dictatorship. The slum turned into a concrete image from where his theme of marginalization found its indexical image. Let us analyze the sign. What do we see? A slum territory. From the images we see inside the frame, a visual narrative emerges. The shot contains signs that help substantiate Brocka's marginalized theme. Its semiotic construction provides a formalist validation of his meaning-making. To understand his film, we need to decode the meanings which the signs reveal. We can start with the manner in which Brocka views the world. While many of us are content in seeing reality as it is, Brocka's critical eye finds ways to discover realities that escape our ordinary perception. Look closely at how the shot was not taken from an eye-level position. Rather, it is taken from an angle that is not quite ordinary. Brocka angled his camera position in order to gain a perspective of the entire squatters' colony and still see what is beyond the slums, a distant factory. The mise-en-scène is loaded with meanings that needs unpacking. One meaning we can unpack is marginalization. Marginality as a theme is cinematized through his formalistic representation. To find this out, let us dissect the formal elements of the movie. See how the image of the slum territory is foregrounded with a factory in the distance. In angling the shot, a new layer of meaning is added compared to a shot taken from an eye-level position. By doing this, Brocka manipulates the image with his aesthetic and political subjectivity, producing a partisan meaning to the image. He has foregrounded the marginal, and with it all the meanings associated with the iconic image. Brocka has politicized the film meaning. This gesture was important in his fight against the dictatorship. He weaponized the image. The film's subjective partiality lies in its politics of space. The image shows the stark contrast between the slum territory, which dominates the shot, occupying 3/4 of the cinematic space, and the image of a factory, occupying the last 1/4 of the frame, but standing above the image of poverty. Placing the squatters in the foreground attracts attention more than the factory. Their sheer number and size overwhelm the lone factory. With the shot taken from the position of the disempowered and the poor, Brocka's subjective position is clear. The film is unapologetically on the side of the marginalized. With a tilt of his camera to include a view of the distant factory, heavily sitting on the roofs of makeshift dwellings, Brocka captures the dialectical relation between the wealth symbolized by the factory and the mass poverty represented by the squatters. The image is not innocent. There is tension between the foreground and the background as they provide meanings that are at odds with each other. In manipulating the shot, Brocka shows the opposing themes which the image loudly shows: wealth against poverty, dominance versus marginalization, and ruling minority against disempowered majority. The shot's use of space, size, distance, perspective is all loaded with semiotic significations. This signifying design allows viewers to think of how ironic the factory appears as a sign of progress, but with no benefit to the larger population. Progress remains unattainably beyond the reach of the marginalized class. This, to Brocka, is how he wanted his viewers to think about the Philippines in the post-World War II era, a country at the firm grip of a despotic ruler, Marcos. Brocka refuses to romanticize the Philippines and shows his country to be mired in poverty. The image he wants us to see is the Philippines as a slum territory. No way to hide the truth. Show it in all its dirt, poverty and naked truth. The indexical sign shows the truth in Brocka's politically charged semiotics. In Brocka's Hellow, Soldier, abstract concepts like marginalization take on visible signs through visual narrative. It is joined by other concepts like colonization. A US soldier returning to the slum territory 17 years after World War II ended tries to convince his grown-up daughter that he illegitimately sired with a laundry woman to go with him to the United States. The incident brings to a boil all the repressed emotions and recriminations that have been kept inside by those he left behind. The drama that unfolds finds a parallel to the historic colonial trauma which happened with the US colonization of the Philippines. The introduction of the main protagonist, Gina, played by Hilda Coronel, says a lot about the dominance of American culture. Pasted on the ramshackle wall of her slum dwelling is a visual world populated by images of American singer Johnny Mathis, US President John F. Kennedy, and First Lady Jackie, and white models. These magazine photos are plastered all over as cover-up to the ramshackle wall of Gina's slum dwelling. On the soundtrack, we hear a popular top 40 tune, Wake Up, Miss Susie, as if serving a critical commentary to Gina, telling her to wake up from her colonial slumber. Both the mise-en-scène and the soundtrack speak volumes in terms of the colonial significations of these signs. In the context of post-colonization, there is a parallax scene between Gina's imagined world, dreaming of America, and the actual world of poverty she lives in. Similarly, Gina's mother, Lucy, played by Anita Linda, has an American flag behind her face with an ad for a West Coast chowder. all signs that encase her poverty with foreign imaginings. The abject wall is pasted with beaming images that put in denial the squalor of her impoverished life. In another scene, showing the entry into the slum territory by an American couple, reveals a semiotic pattern that uncannily recalls the US occupation of the Philippines. The way the cinematic space is penetrated with their journey into the slums looban brings to mind the penetrative power of US invading forces as they colonized the country a century earlier. The arrival of the couple steers up the sleepy slums. They are instantly surrounded by slum dwellers. Notice how in all the shots the American retiree is centered in his placement in the shot, revealing his semiotic dominance over the Filipinos who surround him and his wife. The scene in Hellow, Soldier is mirrored in Victory Joe, with the arrival of the Americans in a sleepy rural town. The soldiers are met with so much enthusiasm by the Filipinos. To show their gratitude to the Americans, they give them drinks and fruits. There is revelry in the street. The level of enthusiasm is matched by these rural folks compared to those in the slum area in Brocka's film. Back to Hello, Soldier, the American couple's entry into the looban is met with images and salutations that recall the triumphant return of US troops as liberators during World War II. Look at the victory sign made by one child as you hear in the soundtrack the chanting of Victory Joe. This is as if it was Liberation Day all over again. But we must realize Brocka's indexical representation of Filipinos shows marks of infantilism. It is like Brocka parodying the infantile act given by Filipinos to returning GI Joes as saviors and liberators in the scene showing how slum dwellers warmly embrace the returning American soldier. The imagery of Filipinos enthusiastically welcoming the American soldiers in Hello, Soldier is echoed in the other film Victory Joe. The flash of the victory sign is also seen in this film to show the warm bond Filipinos had made with their American liberators. Based on actual records, this gesture is marked by historical references too hard to ignore. But the effusive reception given to returning US soldiers is dampened in Victory Joe as we see the war-torn city of Manila totally devastated after the war. We even get a glimpse of the Manila City Hall shown in the background, miserably riddled with bomb shells. This is what war had made of Manila, once the envy of the Orient, but now turned into a heap of rubble. The miserable physical condition of Manila is dramatized in Hello, Soldier. The soldier returns to the depressed state of life where people live in shanties and slum colonies. His effort to get his daughter back instructs us of the extractive power that the US has over Filipinos. Despite the departure of US forces, their return to the country in a post-colonial period meant the extraction of the country's minerals, earning profits from the businesses they own, and dominating the country's cultural life through movies, songs, food, and fashion. It is as if the Americans never left. Reaching the shanty, the American couple is greeted by Gina. Once again seen at the center of the frame, the former soldier enters the slum dwelling with his wife. Unable to find the mother, Lucy, the American barges into a room where he finds her drunk and wasted. It is here that, through dialogue, all recriminations of the past 17 years boil to the surface. The face-to-face confrontation between the laundry woman and her daughter's father provides a metaphoric resonance to the aggrieved feelings Filipinos have over their American colonizers. History is written all over Lucy's dialogue, standing in for the bitterness felt by Filipinos who were shortchanged by their relations with their white colonizers. Cinematic signs bear meanings in the film, including one that many of you may not have obviously noticed. Let us take note of the cinematic space and how Lino Brocka once more politicized its use. At the scene's start, the slum territory is set up as a sign which stands in for the impoverished post-war Philippines. Considered as outsiders are the two Americans who invade the squatters' looban all the way to Gina's shanty and into Lucy's private space. The gestural act of spatial penetration can be compared to the colonial occupation and wartime invasion of the Philippines, whether in the Battle of Manila Bay in 1898 or the Battle of Leyte Gulf in 1945. From outside the country, invaders came to our shores, no different to the arrival of these two Americans. While watching these scenes unfold, did it ever cross anyone's mind as to what film language Lino Brocka uses to enunciate his post-colonial thoughts? Does Lino Brocka speak in Tagalog? I say visual language, as I am not referring to the oral language that one hears spoken in the dialogue. In terms of his film language, or the language that we see on the screen, it might surprise everyone to know that Lino Brocka speaks in the language of the classical Hollywood narrative cinema style. It is from it that the structure of his visual syntax is patterned. It forms his film aesthetics. It is a cinema adhering to the principles of film continuity, invested with a linear narrative that has a logical, causal structure of storytelling. As a fiction film director, it is the classical Hollywood narrative cinema style that Brocka has pledged his allegiance to. Summarily, films that were locally made, such as those by Lino Brocka, were refashioned by local film artists to arrive at a visual lexicon that had foreign origins, but were hybridized to speak in a visual dialect in order to construct their Filipino identity. This makes us wonder out loud, what is Filipino in Lino Brocka's film? This leads us to an investigation of the final theme in this talk, nationalism. As cinema developed in the post-independent society, what national attributes did it develop? While the nationalists among us convinced ourselves that we have attained a national cinema, how much of it can truly be affirmed as being national? Is being national similar to being native? Is being native something like being autochthonous? Or is it similar to being indigenous? Some influential scholars have tried to smother us with ideas about cinema's politically correct views about being Filipino, as if such identity can be distilled into something racially pure and essential. At best, they have only argued for a nativist belief of what Philippine cinema is about. This is not what my research tells me. After writing 3 books on the growth of cinema in the Philippines, seeing its development from the prism of colonial influences, such as its Spanish beginnings, maturity under the Americans, and trauma under the Japanese, my thoughts about Philippine cinema are less immaculate than what native purists have wanted us to believe. I adhere and espouse a materialist, constructivist view of how cinema developed in the country and how its identity took a hybrid form. Its history alone does not warrant a nativist identity. It is more complex and layered than that. Much of the forces that ushered its growth had their influences imbricated onto the medium, resulting to its modern hybridity. For the most part, colonialism brought modernity to the emerging Filipino culture. Cinema is one example of this. As a modern technology, it tangled with traditional society, resulting to a hybrid culture in whose medium was formed a national identity. While it befuddles me to think how our national cinema was actually formed inside the womb of its colonial past, the historical events surrounding its growth have pointed towards such a conclusion. While others want us to deny or repress this hard reality in order to pursue a nativist view, I have come to believe that it will be best to confront the realities of colonialism, modernity, and hybridity, and discover how they became hallmarks of our mestizo cinema. In doing so can be measured our intellectual courage with the dismantling of the aura of invincibility that clothed this cinema with its armory of economic, artistic, political, and epistemic traits. With cinema naked before us, we can now lay bare the forces that allow this cinema to become our national culture. The films made by our homegrown filmmakers cannot escape the historical processes that formed cinema's identity to become Filipino. Becoming nation-centric has been our response to the excesses of the colonial oppression we experienced. This could also be found in the field of cinema. The modernism that freed us from the yoke of tradition set in the past has led us to adopt one of its cherished inventions, the construction of a nation. But that nation, while founded on its past, has all the markings of the modernity that help it come to light. Cinema, a modern invention, brought a new dimension to the traditional identity shaped by the country's colonial past. Finding a national identity for cinema is burdened by the full weight of our colonial experience. In hindsight, it is obvious that the mere act of conceiving a Filipino cinema has led to an epistemological shift in our minds, resulting from the dialectical experience of having the native become imbricated by the foreign. Nationalism came at a price of contradiction and compromise. What indigenous culture there was came to be mediated by the enormity of modern praxis and thought. Nationalism became an aspiration that had to be constantly enunciated with every change of economic order and every major shift in political system. Nationalism is not transhistorical in belief and practice. Early film producers, both foreign and elite native, had predictably sought refuge in the Hispanic and American cultures that surrounded them, likewise making possible the retention of alien cultures in the new motion picture medium. Instead of discarding the Spanish culture in the new medium, they fostered its tenacity in cinema through the crafting of narratives, visualization, and even in replicating its ideology that reflected the Hispanic society. Clothed in nativist external trappings, even while exuding Hollywood's visibly American influences, and together with the Catholic iconographies, local film culture provided a semblance of cultural identity that many of us accepted to be national. That leaves us to think that it would be futile to insist on finding the truly indigenous roots of cinema given such a totalizing, if oppressive, colonial history and influences. The homogenization of cinema brought about by the hegemonization by Western cultures of the film medium overpowered any effort to arrive at a truly indigenous cinema. Any talk of an indigenous cinema becomes suspect because of a false claim to any pure culture that could produce such form of cinema. Conversely, cinema's indigenization, or the process of making something foreign to become local or native, has become the most viable way to account for the way an international medium like film to assume the identity of the host culture. It is along this line of thinking that this talk has sought to account for the arrival and growth of motion pictures in the Philippines while coming out of its colonial experience.
Thank you, Sir Nick. Wow, what a fruitful talk indeed. Literally all of my hair are all rise. Dun sa part na um I watched the part of the film of Hello Soldier. Grabe. All right, audience, this is the sign that you should learn more about science and systems because for sure you will not watch movies the same way again. Sir Nick, I really enjoyed your discussion. Well, in fact, at this very day, I learned that it was semiotics is what I've been doing whenever I watch films, aside from its story, from the angles, the movement of the cameras, even the things I see in every frame has meanings, portray feelings, a message. I also like the part where you pointed out the parallels between the development of post-war Filipino nationalism and the nationalization of Philippine cinema. So, yes, absolutely. Sir Nick.
So I'm very pleased that you have that reaction because I think that will be that could be a fertile ground if all of us can start that way, that we have an understanding of really a visual basis when we watch films Kasi there are two kinds of very dominant approaches in learning film. No? Mainly it is literary. We go to movies like Kita Kita, for example, or the Tadhana film. And what we are there, mainly we want to have the literary story. Anong kwento niya? Okay, and we keep telling each other about the character and the plot and the conflict and how we love the story. But I think it is important that we can find meaning actually in the, as mentioned in my lecture, the more semiotic, the more, the visual language that the director has taken the effort to really convey his message or her message across. Then the other one is more of the social criticism, which is also valid, the Marxist, leftist, what have you. But the important thing right now, I guess, is can we systematize the way we watch movies by looking at the film language that's being deployed?
Definitely, Sir Nick. And I guess I have warmed you up for our next part of our program, no? The Q&A session. I know the audience have been waiting for this. And now I am officially opening the floor for discussion. Again, if you have questions for Sir Nick, you may use the Q&A box, not the chat box again for our Zoom attendees, or the comment section of the Facebook live stream. And we'll try our best to address them. Are you ready, Sir Nick?
Yes, I'm looking at the chat box actually, and I'm pretty much overwhelmed by the snippet reactions that they have. I think this will be an interesting conversation that we're going to have because a lot of people are already making known. Okay, they make known already the insights that they have while watching the tour de force performance of Anita Linda, and but beyond that, as I was watching it myself, my God, the use of language alone, shifting from the iconic to the indexical to the symbolic, when she says, for example, na umalis ka sa dilim ng gabi. That's so symbolic, I mean, what dilim is she talking about? What alis is she talking about? And at the same time, she can be very iconic in saying, hello, soldier, all right? As a greeting, and you compare that with the historical, which is Victory Joe, and the way we welcome the Americans during the liberation, I can imagine we would have a very scintillating time ahead of us.
Of course, Sir Nick, definitely we will have productive talk for this part of our session. Audience, keep them coming, all right? So since you've already mentioned hello, soldier, no, let's proceed. This is actually the first question for you, Sir Nick. This is from Miss Cecil Aison. The question is, why is the hello in hello, soldier, spelled with the letter W?
I am sure many people are asking, and many times the computer, each time I write hello, soldier, with a W, I'm being corrected. Okay, let us realize that Lino Brocka is a realist. All right, and being a realist, his fidelity to mirror reality, whether through images or sounds, all right, would show exactly that he is, as much as possible, trying to be as iconic as he could. When we say iconic, there is a close resemblance between, let's say, nature or reality that you want to copy, which we can call object, and the signifier or the medium, for example, the language that's being used. So we know exactly that the reality of, and the point of view of the film, sino ba ang nagsasabi ng hello, soldier? And that's why I really have to place that excerpt ni Anita Linda, where the first words that she utters would be, hello, soldier. Tayo, kung mga nag-aral tayo sa Lasal at UP, hello, soldier. Diba? Ganun tayo mag-pronounce, hello, hello. Pero sa kanya, makita mo na parang dialect, no? Parang ito ang sabihin na natin dahil labandera lang siya, no? Ani kawawa naman. I mean, really, she is presented as a laundry woman, uneducated dahil panahon ng gera yon, and of course, she is of the low class. And so you could see in the inflection of the sound what my friend Bale would John Labella would say, I'm trying to remember the exact words he said, the disfigurement of language. Ang ganda ng sinabi niya. John Labella has described that scene as it's a scene showing the disfigurement of language, so that we have this standard language, it's hello soldier without a W, and suddenly here it is, Lino Brocka, all the way to the title, all the way to the utterance of Anita Linda of the word hello soldier. He really tries to be as iconic as he could. In other words, trying to have as close a resemblance to the source of his inspiration as much as he could. So mainly, I would like to think that this is a brilliant act by Lino Brocka and his team. No, whoever thought about that no, let's bring it all the way to the title, that it's Hello Soldier. So at the very, very title alone, there is a self-declaration. Whose point of view are we watching this film? Who is saying hello soldier? So alam natin na kahit yung subjective identity ng character ng isang laundry woman is presented up front and center all the way to the title. It's a brilliant and instructive way of creating not only titles but of course narratives.
Yes, Sir Nick. And also from our chat box, no, coming from Foylan Miranda, the W from the Hello Soldier also came from World War. So there are some speculations that the W came from a war or World War from our chat, from our
Okay,
audience.
alamin lang natin, no? Katulad ng Victory Joe, katulad ng Jeepney Girl, katulad ng Hanggang Pierre, these were all, anong tawag nito, street language na ginawa nung panahon na yon.
Yeah.
But then again, kung hello soldier lang without a W, we know exactly na, pwedeng as a standard language ng abale, it's somebody educated and all that. But once again, I repeat, the use of the W is a brilliant act on the side of Brocka to make it known already that, look, we are talking here about a laundry woman.
All right. Thank you so much for that, Sir Nick. No, let us now proceed with our second question coming from Angela Pasilik. The question is, how did the Filipino audiences at the time of war take the propaganda films being produced by the Japanese?
Although I was not born during that time, I had my research, which all went into this 500-page book that I wrote, all right? And I was almost anticipating this question because that's a very interesting question to ask. How did the audience during that time, really react to the propaganda movies? Not only the propaganda movies, but the Japanese, even if they banned American Hollywood movies from being screened in our country's movie houses, they were forced to bring them back because the Filipinos demanded their entertainment. Nakakaburyong ng panahon ng gera. Anong gagawin nila doon? Hindi sila makapagtanim ng mani, hindi sila makapagtrabaho, etc. Walang telebisyon, walang lahat. So in the end, the Eiga Haikyusha made the decision, okay, we're going to show these movies, but they would be highly censored. So two ways that they censored them. Everything that showed anything that was American, cut them out. American flag, American character, etc., etc. And on the other hand, any scene that showed derogatory images of the Japanese, cut them all out. So in the end, what would happen to the films? What would happen to the films? Because these are not new films anymore. There was an embargo in the Philippines. We could not import. For 3 years, Hollywood movies could not enter the Philippine shores. Therefore, they were recycling the movies over and over again. Memorized na ng mga Tagalog at ng mga Pilipino at mga Bisaya ang mga films na ito kasi favorite nila yan eh. Favorite nila si John Wayne, favorite nila si Katharine Hepburn, favorite nila si kung sino pa mga big stars, Clark Gable, alright? So alam nila ang kwento kasi Filipinos have the habit of watching movies over and over again. Hindi katulad ngayon nga bali na okay, after the movie is done, you go out, you buy your new ticket if you want to come in. Doon nung una, pwede silang matulog, kumain, pananghalian hanggang hapunan sa loob ng sinihan. Ganyan ang kaloyal ang mga moviegoers natin noon. So when they see movies, that they know exactly maghahalikan na itong dalawang character na ito o apir itong Amerikano na ito, ay aba, puputulin. So what is the impact of that in the story or in the narrative? Magja-jump yung kwento. So ang dami-daming putol na mga eksena sa mga pelikulang ito, and of course nagrereklamo ang audience. I'll point out one exactly, and let me read it in my book. It's a great question. As I said, I sort of anticipated this. There is a housewife in her diary named Pasita Pestaño Jacinto who wrote the following. This Japanese, she was criticizing the Japanese. These Japanese cannot seem to make their likes and their rabid nationalism coincide. They have a board of censors that so religiously cuts off any movie dialogue or sequence that in any way upholds America as a nation. They do not understand that it is the picture as a whole that carries the theme. So nagrereklamo siya na I cannot understand the movies that I like so much because these Japanese keep on cutting the movies. The last one other reaction that stand out in my mind is when they made the propaganda film Dawn of Freedom starring Fernando Poe Sr. and Leopoldo Salcedo, one viewer at naisulat ito sa Philippines Free Press yata, sabi niya, nako, dapat ang pelikulang yan hindi tatawaging Dawn of Freedom. Dapat Down with Freedom. Kasi, di ba, the Japanese really wanted the Filipinos to be under their control, and America, symbolizing freedom for us, were the ones that were considered to be enemies, and therefore he said that this film is about down with freedom rather than the dawn of freedom. So yeah, there had been interesting reactions to movies during the time.
Wow, that was really overwhelming. But I guess, Sir Nick, they would want, if they would want to know more about what happened during the Japanese time, or what their propaganda, they could look for your book, which is came from your EGA, no? From your reading that you had. Yes. And it's available here in our library. So if you want to know more about that, please check out FHL. So let us proceed, sir, with the third question from Lena Vera. Has the age of streaming, as you mentioned then a while ago about having the leisure time of watching films during those times, has the age of streaming changed audiences? Yeah, if there is a difference between audiences now and Brocka's audience, or audiences today and the viewers of Victory Joe?
Wow, we are really a world apart, from the time of one. We're really talking generationally of three different kinds of audiences. And whoever asked that question, I would encourage everybody or somebody or students. I know there are many of you out there who could really study, instead of just watching films and studying films, to really study audiences. I claim that there are three generations of audiences. The generation of Manuel Silos, the one who did Victory Joe, and that was, he made that film in 1946. So he belonged to the golden era. That was the time when the kind of movies that we had were really and strictly commercial as much as possible. Of course, the artists tried to make good sense in the films they made, but mainly we are talking about the template of commercialism, that films were really made to be viewed by mainstream audiences. That's why we have a studio system that were people with capitalists, and they do not want to lose money. They want to make as much money as they could. So that is the context of commercialism. When Lino Brocka came in, the generation of filmmakers became bifurcated or divided. Okay, what do we mean by that? Lino Brocka was now beginning to, as I mentioned in the lecture, was beginning to be politicized because mainly of the context he was in. The movie industry not only has collapsed, it has become divided. Those that were in support of the spectacle that Marcos wanted to put in place in society, while Lino Brocka represented the independent, marginalized, and more politicized groups. So to a certain point, Lino Brocka did not really have big audiences. That's a big mistake for us to think. Many of his films nilangaw din yan. Some films were even banned. So how could you recoup your money? And in fact, you began to ask questions. Why was Lino Brocka making films when after all his films could not really be shown or did not make money? Somewhere in his consciousness, and therefore the consciousness that we bequeath, kami na next generation abale, na films could serve other purposes. And you know exactly that Lino Brocka came at a very interesting period in Philippine politics, wherein we really had to fight a dictator. He was part of that fight. Now, in the time of streaming right now, abale, now you tell me whether there's still an audience for Lino Brocka. You are a generation apart. Is Lino Brocka just part of the menu out there that you're going to watch? So here I am taking an effort. I am making an effort of making Lino Brocka and his generation and the cause that they did during martial law to be more relevant to the generation now. I am equipping ourselves, adding tools in our toolbox to understand exactly how Lino Brocka had a great sense of what cinema is. I just wish there will be questions now that bring us really to the subject that I really want to talk about. How is image used in filmmaking? I know that many na nag-attend ng session na ito ngayon ay gustong gumawa ng pelikula, etc., etc. But do you know really how to use images? So I was trying to point out exactly that Lino Brocka, has made all the efforts despite his limited budget. Kitang-kita mo naman na talagang walang ka-budget ito halos ang paggawa niya ng pelikula, and yet he made great use of that opportunity to speak the language of cinema, which is the title of this talk anyway. That is there, what are we attending to and what are we using when we really make films? It is motion pictures, and motion pictures are not innocent. Keep that in mind. Motion pictures are not innocent, both in your making and in the consumption of those images. Lino Brocka has politicized this and may even use a stronger word, weaponized. Alam na alam niya ang kanyang kalaban. That was the Marcos and the military regime. And what else did he have? As a filmmaker, his tool was film. And dito niyo makikita how powerful film, the film medium can be. And yet, alalahanin niyo, he was living in the most difficult time na puro censorship. Ando dyan si Maria Calao Katigbak, ilang beses siya dinala sa threatened ng court order and threatened to be brought to jail, mainly because of his films. So I just hope we can really talk more about that. But just to conclude what I'm saying about the audiences, hindi natin pwedeng sabihin na ang audience ngayon is better off than the audience sa panahon ni Lino Brocka or better off to. Ibahin natin na hindi trans-historical. No? Alamin natin hindi trans-historical ang subjectivity natin at ang practices natin in viewing movies. Unang-una, streaming right now is talagang nangyayari lang sa digital. So it is fairly recent. I think more researches need to be made for us to really come up with a very informed answer while comparing the different audiences in at least these three post-war audiences that we have for Philippine cinema. But that's a great question, though.
Though I have a follow-up question on that, sir. Can you say that Brocka took the risk? And if so, did he follow norms of contemporaries?
Of Lino Brocka, well, which Lino Brocka are we talking about? I think that's an added question to that. Kasi when Lino Brocka started in 1970 with Wanted Perfect Mother, and then later on he followed it up in 1974. I think for me, the golden years of Lino Brocka was starting in 1974 all the way to maybe around 1978. These were the early Lino Brockas. Lino Brocka, for me, in the book that I'm beginning to write right now was a pure genius. I am trying to decode semiotically, politically, narratively his films, and I just could not imagine. Meanings upon meanings upon meanings are just exploding in his works. But I'm talking about the early Lino Brocka. Alalahanin niyo, however, si Lino Brocka, dahil siya ay uncompromising at sagot sa tanong mo, did he follow his contemporaries? No? Anong ibig sabihin ni Raven tungkol sa did he follow his contemporaries? Ang ibig sabihin dito ni Raven ay commercialism was the order of the day. Alalahanin nyo nung panahon ni Lino Brocka around the 70s na ito yung pagsabog ng bomba films, ng sex, ng sex movies, puro kabastusan. Bagsak na ang studio system na nagko-control ng ethical values ng pelikula. Wala na yung mga manang na ng mga taga-sampagita or premiere, right? Having said that, pariwara, no? Balahura ang mga pelikula. Can you imagine gumagawa tayo ng cowboy movies? Wala namang cowboy sa Pilipinas. Wala namang ranchohan dito. May mga Indians tayo. May ita tayo. Oo, para Indians na talagang yung Indians na gano'n. Come on, you know. Bakit gano'n ang mga pelikulang ginagawa natin? Because nagko-compete sa Hollywood nga, no? Kasi suddenly OK Corral, you know, the big cowboy movie, the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, you know, suddenly big time dito yan, together with martial arts films. So kopyang-kopya yan ng mga natin, ng mga filmmakers. Lumihis si Lino Brocka doon during his early career. Kaya nga, ang aking pag-aaral ngayon ay ano ang film language na ginamit ni Lino Brocka despite the great dominance of Hollywood classical narrative cinema. Kasi Lino Brocka actually speaks, if I may answer my own question sa promo natin na ito, no, na anong language bang ginamit ni Lino Brocka? Mainly, I will venture to say na Lino Brocka could not escape the dominant classical Hollywood cinema. However, in his politicization of the medium, he was able to arrive at what I would consider now as, you know, and this is the early part of my study, the Tagalog film language, or maybe the Filipino film language. I cannot go into full detail, but you have a taste of it dito sa aking presentation kanina, na nahahanap natin through the subjectivity of the characters that he had, that he's able to revise, to appropriate, to innovate the existing classical Hollywood cinema that is really prone to commercialism into something that is more political and therefore closer to the Filipino sensibility of how it is to live as a Filipino. Ang point ko lang dito ngayon ay, after 1978, Lino Brocka just started to become commercial upon commercial. And sometimes he would make films like Ora Pro Nobis or Bayan Ko, Kapit sa Patalim or Bona. Papasulpot-sulpot na lang yun. But you see, Lino Brocka, it is being uncompromising, na-demanda yan. Oo, sa kanyang pelikulang Tinimbang Kang Ngunit Kulang, dinimanda siya at nanalo yung kalaban niya, nagkautang-utang si Lino Brocka. Okay, at ang nangyari dito ay, para niya mabayaran yung napinsala niya dahil inakusa nga siya na may kinopya siya, etc., etc., he had to really work. At ang sabi niya, dalawang bagay. He really had to pay his bills. And number two, maraming tao ang nakasalalay sa kanya in terms of hanap buhay. Mga artista at mga especially crew. Therefore, he made films that really were inane, insane, hayop sa hayop, you know, wherein this time nakahubad na si Hilda Coronel, you know, I mean, suddenly all of these compromises he had to make. And sa totoo lang, Lino Brocka made more films. Siguro 3/4 of the films that he made, you know, 3/4 of the films that he made were really commercials. Wherein hindi mo makikilala na trabaho ni Lino Brocka ito. So may dalawang mukha si Lino Brocka, but he was really a child of his times. So in the end, yung sabi mo, Raven, bali na, did he speak the language of his contemporary? in the second part of his career, yes, tumiklop din ang ating magiting na mandirigma.
And there's one comment here from our audience. This question was, makakakain ka pa ba ng popcorn pag Lino Brocka films ang pinapanood mo? So, that was,
Napakaganda ng tanong.
I know.
Comment yun, di ba? Mas comment siguro yun. Oo.
Yeah. All right, so thank you so much for that. Let's proceed with the next question. This came from an anonymous. I would like to ask, in the process of making a film, how do we add these signs and hidden meanings without it being too overdone or excessive?
Great question. I bet either this is a filmmaker or somebody who really wants to become a filmmaker. All right. How much do you know your subject? Okay, yun ang dapat pag-aralan natin. How much do you master your subject? What I know of Lino Brocka is that before he became a director for film, he was a director for theater. UP din ako, we come from the same department sa UP. Speech and drama ang tawag dun sa kanya nung una. Tatlong national artists ang nanggaling dun sa batch ni Lino Brocka. Ang kasama niya doon na naging national artist din at classmate niya rin, si Ismael Bernal. At ang pangatlo ay si Kidlat Tahimik. That was a fantastic generation of theater arts people. So, ang point ko dito ngayon ay, Lino Brocka already had been trained in theater. So kahit pa hindi siya masyadong nagso-storyboard to help prepare yourself, ang dinig ko kay Lino Brocka talaga nung una, kasi I used to listen to his lectures in the same way you people are now listening to me. I'm just, passing on the baton as well, as I'm sure he did his. He insists on the script. Hindi ka pwedeng mag-shoot na wala kang script. He is almost very militant about it. Where is the script? At ang sabi ng abali, kung gusto nating baguhin ang Filipino movie industry, ang unang gawin natin ng abali ay ayusin natin ang script. We need good script writers. So, kitang-kita mo, ang kanyang una agad ng mga pinapartner na katrabaho. Tingnan mo na lang. Halos stable of writers yan. Ricky Lee, Pete Lacaba, yan ang mga favorite niya. Okay, na mainly, maayos na script, that's all he's wanted. So, yung sa tanong nga, Bali, how do you assure it na hindi obvious? Makikita mo niyan sa script eh. Anda dyan sa script mo yan. Dapat anda dyan mo na, ang script mo kasi is the blueprint of your film. Know every dialogue. Know every logline that you have. Ano ang gusto mong gawin sa logline? Marami kasi sa atin, Diyos ko naman, itong pinakaayaw ko na sa mga pa-indie-indie films natin na, parang genius. Nag-aral lang ng isang beses, nag-webinar lang kay Nick Deocampo. Wow, direct na ang gustong tawag sa kanila, nakakagawa ng film. Wow, nanalo na siya sa, ewan ko, Cinemalaya or somewhere else. Wow, parang full-fledged director na siya. Sandali po, a little humility. Oo, baka natsambahan mo lang. Subukan mo nga the next time. Sige, nanalo ka ulit. O nanalo ka over and over. Di magaling ka. O di alam mo ang pinaggagawa mo. But the point is, I'm really dealing here, ang tanong na ito is really meant for people who really want to have meaning as a tool in their field. So the first tool that we can tell you is, really polish your script. Number 2, may mga tools na tayo kasi marami na tayong film schools ngayon. Ako, kung nagtuturo ako sa UP, ang sunod na ini-insist ko sa mga ina-advise ko would be storyboard. Do not think na, wow, may script ako dito, inilagay sa servilleta, sa isang napkin. Sige, pwede ito shoot kasi may script na ako, andito sa napkin. Kita nyo. Hindi eh. Dapat you really discuss this with your team. So, don't think that the first thing that comes to your mind, that's the first meaning that is good. It can be challenged by your assistant director. It can be challenged by, direct, talagang ito ba ang line na sasabihin natin? Parang ang sagwa naman, direct. Baka pwede nating parang hindi politically correct. Kay babae kong tao, direct, sasabi ako ng bullshit dito. Hindi naman sa karakter ko yan, direct. Anong meaning ang gusto natin dito, direct? So, all of this can really be worked out. Number 3, you can do rehearsals. All right, so there are enough. I cannot go into all the details because it's not a directing workshop. The point I'm saying is there are enough safeguards for you to test your ideas or the meanings, whether they are obvious and blatant, and therefore nagpapakapropaganda ka, or are they subtle like Lino Brocka? Kung alalahanin nyo, Lino Brocka is a pure genius. Ito ang dialogue na naririnig nyo, pero ang ginagawa ko sa inyo ay pinapakita ko na nagsasalita si Lino Brocka visually. But the point is, and I challenge everyone who's listening right now, do you know how to read Lino Brocka's films visually? Naku, hindi pa tayo pumunta sa dalawang malalaking pelikula pa na gusto ko i-discuss sana. Tinimbang Ka Ngunit Kulang, which is a pure masterpiece, unbelievable. For me, it's better than Manila sa Kuko ng Liwanag. I'm sorry for those who are for Manila, but Tinimbang is a pure product of genius. And number two, Bayan Ko, Kapit sa Patalim is one of his most sophisticated films. And I'm talking about visual language kasi nagsasalita si Lino para bang meron siyang kinocode na message na to whom it may concern in the future. I did not know he was talking to me and he is talking to you. It's about time we demystify the film language of Lino Brocka. That's why I'm writing a book on Lino Brocka to know exactly what Lino Brocka imparted to his not only to his generation but to generations yet to come, which is you and I. Lino Brocka has more messages and more relevance now that we are facing the possibility of another Marcos going to Malacanang.
Wow. I mean, as a non-filmmaker, as an audience, as a consumer of film, this is very, very informative and overwhelming, and at the same time very impactful, Sir Nick. Grabe.
Thank you.
When it comes to we have to put our shoes, I mean, on the shoes of the audiences naman, no, coming from Lino Brocka, the director, filmmaker, and then the consumer naman. Somehow this question from Andrea Lagura is similar with that. So when it comes to semiotics, presuming that everyone has their own experiences and background, does individual interpretation remove the meaning of a scene or the film itself?
Individual meaning is the way you connect to a film. When I teach my classes, hindi ko hinihiya ang estudyante ko dahil medyo saliwa yung meaning niya. Hindi natin alam what that person is going through. Siya ay ba na-rape? May isa akong estudyante, for example, na bigla na lang nag-iiyak sa isang pelikula na nagpapakita ng rape, medyo nakakatawa dapat yung eksenang yon. So, mali ba siya? I mean, is she out of her mind? Why she is reacting that way? Look, we do not know what she is going through. I am not also going to tolerate meanings that are really outrageously out and out. Alam mo, semiotics is a science. Semiotics is a science. In other words, you just cannot be, even in its more arbitrary, even in its arbitrary use, there is something scientific pa rin in semiotics. What do I mean by this? First of all, is the basis of your reaction verifiable? Pag sinabi, for example, natin na na-overwhelm ang mundo ni Gina, yung si Hilda Coronel kanina, ng American colonial imagination, saan ko binabatay ang isang conclusion na ganyan? Pinakitaan ko kayo, di ba, ng mga magazine photographs, ng mga Western magazine photographs na nakadikit doon sa wall niya. So, kung nakikita ko yon, nakikita ni Raven yon, nakikita ng Ayala team yon, bakit hindi mo nakita yon? O di kaya, may nakikita ka ba doon na hindi ko nakikita? Many times, napapahiya ako sa estudyante ko kasi mas magaling ang tingin ng mga estudyante. Meron dito kanina si Charles Bautista. Shout out to Charles Bautista. Samantalang nanonood tayo ng eksena ni Anita Linda kanina, nagta-chat si Charles Bautista na sabi niya, look at the American guy. Eto na, nakaupo si, try to know this, si Anita Linda ay nakaupo na at dumating na yung lalaki, dumating na ang babae at sinasabi niya na, ay may mga bisita pala tayo, etc. Okay? So ang sabi ni Charles ay, look at the American soldier, he is at the center and the camera is tilted up. So he is being shown to be dominant over the other characters. That's it. I mean, I did not realize the camera position at the time. Kasi nadala na ako doon sa emotion ng ng dialogue ni Anita Linda. I mean, she is such a powerful actress, no? Her performance is tour de force, nothing less. All right? So suddenly, ito ang problema sa atin when we watch films. Unless you are somebody like Charles Bautista, who immediately can step back, okay, almost like shut down or lessen down his dependence on the dialogue, and suddenly look at the visual language. Oo, tingnan mo yan. So ang sabi ko nga sa lecture ko, paulit-ulit ang representation ni Lino Brocka sa Amerikano na ito. He is always found at the center. And eto dinagdagan ni Charles Bautista nga bali na yung tilted camera looking up. Okay, hi Charles. Okay, shout out to you as well. You're brilliant. Your reading is brilliant. I learned something from you. All right? Na, you know, when you repeat patterns of images like this, hey baby, that's language. What is language but repeated patterns of sounds or images or letters? Sino nagsabi sa iyo na DOG or ASO is about this four-legged furry animal that says ow, 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 bow, wow, wow, aso? Eh dahil pinagtuturuan tayo with the fear of failure in class, pag hindi ka marunong mag-spell ng DOG, dog, there is so much violence in our learning. Hihiyain ka, tatanggalan ka ng pantalon. Yun ang ginagawa sa akin nung elementary grades kami. May mga classmate ako hindi marunong mag-spell, hinuhubaran, pinapapunta sa gitna ng klase at hinuhubaran ng pantalon. My God, the violence that goes into our educational system. Yung pagbigay ng failing grade, that is violence. Para lang matuto tayo. Therefore, wala namang pakialam ang letters na D, O, G sa four-legged animal, and yet we associate them. So the point that I'm trying to say here right now is that film language, meanings, and all of this, you know, they are socially accepted because it belongs to our visual culture. And yet, let me just underline why we are here today and what we are going through. It is for us to know exactly that there are meanings that are being encoded in the images that we use, in the conventions that we believe in. And therefore, I leave it at that. I hope we can expand it some more with other questions.
Of course, of course. I think since we have limited time, we have to filter or sift some of the questions kasi a lot are still coming in. So yes,
I'm so glad.
Yes.
We have a very active audience. Great.
All right.
I wish I can see you all. Sayang
Of course,
lang.
yes. For this next question, no, what were the most and least explored war themes in our cinema post-war? Was there more focus on Philippine bravery or war effects on the society?
Nobody has really made an inventory, no? Because first thing about it, how could we make an inventory, and how can I even give you an informed answer when many of our films are lost? Mga pelikula lang natin in the 80s, pelikula ni Lino Brocka, ilan lang ang natira. I had to go to Paris or Germany to secure some films. Dahil mabuti pa abroad na nang hindi ibinalik ang mga pelikula ni Lino Brocka, nagalit tayo na bakit ando doon sa Frankfurt ito, bakit ando doon sa Nantes ito, etc. Kung saan mang TV station ito. Bakit hindi nila binalik ang mga pelikula nila? Pasalamat na nga tayo na hindi nila binalik, hindi nawala. So at least kahit pa paano nahanap natin. So the point that the question that's being asked is, ano yung mga themes ng post-war? It's hard to say that because we cannot make an inventory or a study of them because wala tayong archive to really, for the immediate post-war. However, ang pinakagusto ko na napanood ko, kaya sasabihin ko na lang, at least yung alam ko, no? Dahil napanood ko sila, ito na yon, isa ito sa nagustuhan kong bale, LVN bale ay itong Hellow, I'm sorry, Victory Joe. At bakit siya commercial na commercial? In other words, I think the better word is popular na popular. Dahil kanyang inirepresent sa pelikula ang phenomenon ng kababaihan natin na tinatawag na jeepney girl. Ito yung mga kababaihan natin na nagalit ang mga ano natin, sundalo na nakipaglaban sa gera, na bakit yung mga girlfriend nila, mga asawa nila ay lumalambitin doon sa mga kano. First of all, ang kano ay matangkad, talagang wow, gwapo, etc., etc. At may mga jeep yan. So ang tawag doon sa mga babaeng sumasama sa kano, lalo na sumasakay sa jeep, at yan mapapanood nyo sa Victory Joe, jeepney girl. Okay? O hindi kaya, anong tawag nito? Hanggang pier ka lang. Kasi may eksena dun sa huli sa Victory Joe kung saan tumatangis ang mga kababaihan, yung iba na buntis na, dahil paalis na ang mga kano at sila ay hanggang pier lang. Kaya ang huling tawa ay nandoon sa mga boyfriend nila na ha 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 ha. Ayan, kumakapit ka dyan sa mga kano, hanggang pier ka lang. Sorry ka. O, sa tingin mo, babalik pa ako sa'yo? Hindi na. May ibang girlfriend na ako. Hanggang pier ka lang. So, all of the, films like this capture the humor, but also capture the tragedy of people like Lucy in Hello, Soldier. Isa siya sa mga nabiktima nitong mga kano na nabuntis at tulad ng sinabi ni Lucy, naglaho sa dilim ng gabi, which is a symbolic terminology for you just disappeared. You just left me in the dark. O parang translation lang yun, you left me in the dark. O, so ang ganda ng mga pelikula na ito na kung mapag-aralan natin in their indexicality. In other words, in what way are they symptoms of reality? Yun ang aking concern when I study films na post-war. Paano natin makikita ang epekto ng gera? Nakita niyo doon yung eksena na nag-aaway na yung dalawang babae, si Lucy, na, ikaw palang asawa, ang ganda mo. Putsang ina, ang galing-galing mag-set up ni Lino Brocka. He is just the master of directing. Diba? Lapit siya muna na, ang ganda mo. Ngunit, and then bigla na lang nag-develop, nakita mo ang intensity, nag-develop, hanggang nag-away na yung babae. I mean, it was World War between those two women. But it was, if you're going to be psychoanalytic about it, it was an expression of trauma. The trauma suddenly was brought out. And Lino Brocka was great in setting it up. Dahan-dahan, hindi mo malalaman, ginulat ka na lang pala. Nagkakalmutan na yung dalawang babae. And it cannot escape also racial reading. Ito na yung the revenge of the colonized. So ang sarap pag-aralan ng eksenang yon, dalawang babae nga, saan ang lalaki? Tumitingin lang. Totoong napaka-patriarchal, tumitingin lang, wala siyang ginawa. Nag-aaway na itong dalawang babae, and yet, wala. And it's because of him. Nag-aaway yung dalawang babae na, ikaw pala ang naging asawa, at ang sinabi na lang ni sa huli was, in a very self-deprecating way, hindi pala akong asawa. Again, Lino Brocka coded it with such a brilliant emotion, the way na nag-act si Anita Linda na nagpakumbaba at nag-retreat ang movement niya. The semiotic meaning is just exquisite and delicate. I mean, next time people, if you encounter films like this, itigil-tigil nyo naman. Pag-aralan nyo talaga, pinagtrabahuan ito ni Lino Brocka. May kahulugan sa likod niya. Kung acting class ito ngayon, sige nga, ipa-act ko kayo. Ikaw, Raven, ipa-act kita. Sige, try to do that. Lalabas na kirida ka lang. Okay, ito ang subtext mo. Nakita mo ng asawa. Show me the emotion na, di ba, ikaw ay kirida lamang. Anong ginawa ni Parang, putsang ina, the best hand movement I have seen, the best retreat I have seen, the best anghang tamis na sa mukha niya. It's a master class in film acting. Please, can we repeat the scene? Kung may time lang tayo, I want it repeated because Lino Brocka encoded a lot of racial, gender, aesthetic meaning in that very simple retreat of Anita Linda. Brilliant, a masterpiece.
And again, Sir Nick, no, just to consider everything that you said about the semiotics, particularly with the movies and all. This last question, no, I think will all make it tahe everything that you said, no. Especially it came from again your specially mentioned Charles Bautista. Medyo miss you itong question na to, no. So as our final question, so do movies have the power to change the course of the future?
Oh, what a brilliant question. Charles, dapat mag-inuman tayo. Punta ka na Maginhawa. Mag-inuman tayo dito. Alright, ganito. Have science got the power to change the future? What a way to end this discussion. And I'm going to preface it by saying that signs and symbols have power. They are power. The question that I want to give everybody today, in the light of the coming election, in the light of our 14 billion, no. Is it 14 trillion national debt? Pati mga anak ng apo ninyo, na itinda na natin ang kanilang kinabukasan, ang laki-laki ng utang ng Pilipinas. My question to us right now in terms of the economic problems we have, in terms of the political change that that is beginning to happen, under what signs are we living in? What am I really talking about? Just look at the politics of color. My pink, my green, my red, my stripe. You know, suddenly, kahit pa may call for unity, nakikita mo kung paano na tayo nagdi-divide. Don't you understand, people, we are being manipulated in terms of the color sign, of the sign of colors. These politicians know how to mobilize us people at pinaghahati-hati na nga tayo. And yet we do not seem to be aware about it. Even if it is in the most obvious right now, o kakamping ka, o bigla na lang ang dilawan, talagang wala na, talagang warat na ang dilawan. My God, I was a witness and I was in that generation wherein to be a dilawan is really, you're almost like a hero. We did our best. Our generation in the Brocka, we did our best to oust a dictator. Yeah, we identified with the color, but then very fickle ang ating semiology at ang ating semiotics, no? Papalit-palit tayo. We cannot seem to like hold on, but we must know exactly that beliefs and practices cannot forever remain the same. Ang gusto nating pag-aralan dito ng abali is paano nagpo-produce ng kahulugan ang mga senyales, so that we will know and we will be on guard exactly whether we are just being manipulated here or we really believe in that particular color because of the strong belief that I have for what it represents. Kaya masarap pag-aralan niya abali kung ano ang components na pumupunta sa semiotics. Kung ginagamit lang natin dito ay kay Charles Sanders Peirce. At ang sinasabi dito, it's an icon, it's an index, and it's a symbol. But we need to know exactly what composes those images. What I mean here is that there is an object. It can be nature. It can be the politician. It can be the Philippines. And what is the sign that represents it? Is it the slum that represents the Philippines? Lino Brocka made a career out of that. He founded his reputation as a director and used it against Imelda Marcos. Nakilala internationally si Lino Brocka. And yet, was Lino Brocka an empty sign? No! 40 years after he has made the film, kita nyo ako, I'm still fiery and consumed by passion, just uncovering ulit the films of Lino Brocka and what they tried to mean. Because there was authenticity in the meaning making of Lino Brocka. And my project right now is how to make a pedagogy, isang uri ng pag-aaral na magagamit ng mga estudyante natin, ng mga guru natin, para hindi na tayo maloko nitong mga paggamit at pagmanipulate sa atin ng mga science. Let us be frank about it. Lino Brocka also manipulated science. All of us manipulate science. The problem is, do we know how and when it is being manipulated? And with that, I guess, kulang na kulang itong ating webinar. But I really hope that sa maiksing time that we have na bale, I was able to impart with you all the things that I have acquired in terms of my knowledge about cinema. Isang malaking pasasalamat sa Ayala Foundation, especially sa Filipinas Heritage Library, to my dear friend John Labella, and to the entire team, Monica and Cecil and Andre, and you especially, Raven, maraming salamat. And to all of you who attended, took time out this weekend, this Saturday, maraming salamat po. And I hope to encounter you again in the future. Ngayong mukhang mag-face-to-face na ang lahat. Salamat po. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. And I think, again, in other words, we need to be critical. Thank you,
Yes.
Sir Nick, for the interesting presentation and fruitful and productive Q&A discussion. There are still questions incoming, but I hope we would address them later on in different platforms, so further question. And of course, all of you who joined us today, thank you very much. Thank you, Sir Nick. I hope
Thank
you
you.
have a good day ahead.
You too. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Bye.
All right, everyone, don't leave yet because, as mentioned earlier, this activity is part of Liberation's War and Hope. Sorry, this activity is part of Liberation, War and Hope, FHL's commemorative events for the 75th anniversary of the end of World War II, which also includes the library's virtual exhibition, War Through the Eyes of the Child, on Google Arts and Culture. Please visit it by scanning the QR code on your screen or to this link. You may also visit FHL's YouTube channel to view the previous Liberation Talks webinars. Please go to this link as shown on your screen. We would also like to thank the U.S. Embassy in the Philippines for supporting this event, as well as Manila Bulletin for telling timely stories and timeless truths. Please do not forget to like FHL's social media pages for updates. Follow the Filipinas Heritage Library, Ayala Foundation, Ayala Museum, the U.S. Embassy in the Philippines, and Manila Bulletin on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. The Ayala Museum and Filipinas Heritage Library are now open and excited to welcome you back to our space safely. To book an on-site visit, go to ayalamuseum.org and filipinaslibrary.org.ph. Also visit the library's website to know more about our Filipiniana collections and to access our online library. For materials on World War II in the Philippines, please check out the Roderick Hall collection at rodhall.filipinaslibrary.org.ph. And we'd like to hear feedback. Please go to this link or scan the QR code to share with us your thoughts about this event. I know this is very interesting and an exciting 2-hour part of your Saturday. So submit your feedback to get a digital certificate. And again, thank you everyone. We hope you learned a lot from this webinar. Please stay safe and stay healthy. Until next time, paalam!